right. Well, I think we need a little bit of a call and response. So how about if I say, Fresno's exciting, and you say, yes, it is. Ready? Fresno's exciting.
Yes, it is.
Fresno's exciting.
Yes, it is.
I don't believe you. And nobody else does either. And that's the problem, right? Let me tell you a story. It's not a prescription. I'm not prescribing this for you or your city. It's just a description of what we think is a pretty exciting movement that's growing in our city, a movement of cultivating faith-rooted social enterprise ecosystem. Well, we're talking about Fresno, California. And Fresno, California has an image problem among other problems. Either it was invisible, appearing only as a byline in David Letterman jokes occasionally, or it was seen as a kind of one-trick pony, right? As in raisins. And, raisins are good. They're part of what we do, but we also feed the world, producing close to 80% of all fruits and vegetables in this country. Or, at its worst, it became a symbol of what could befall a city. Let's take a look at some of those number ones. We were number one in the nation for concentrated poverty in large cities. Number one in payday lenders exploiting the poor in the state. Number one in the nation for unhealthy air, especially bad for children, and therefore number one in childhood asthma. Number one in car thefts, number one in all crime categories in California, except one, murder, where, wait for it, we were number two. Fresno had an image problem. We psychologically hit bottom when San Francisco, trying to keep its people in town due to the high cost of living, put signs on the sides of all their buses saying, don't resort to Fresno, trying to prevent people from moving out. I mean, ouch. With double-digit unemployment, sometimes triple the national average, 1 out of every 3 children living under the federal poverty line growing up poor in Fresno. That's 100,000 children. And many of them are my neighbors. 26 years ago, my family and I moved into the Lowell neighborhood, the highest poverty, highest crime neighborhood of the city. And when I look around, I see these are my friends, these are my neighbors. And this idea of what we were, this pathology of thinking of all the negatives being number one in all the wrong categories, is sad because there are more than 600 churches in our city. 600 institutions supposedly filled with a theology and people of hope and promise and possibility. Add to that 100 Christian nonprofits that have arisen to deal with the social problems. And all of the churches and all of the nonprofits could tell wonderful anecdotal stories about how we were making a difference in individual lives, but somehow that never added up to a collective impact, never moving the needle on poverty. But now add to this mix a thoughtful, articulate, possibility-thinking change agent, a mayor, who loved God and she was not afraid to ask the question about how a city changes, wasn't afraid to challenge the narrative that had grown so cynical, so self-defeating. She gathered a group of faith leaders and asked them a very provocative question. Went like this: what do you all think is the role of faith institutions in seeking the economic well-being of the city? Now let me tell you, ask pastors and faith leaders about what the spiritual needs of the city are. Ask about the social needs of the city, and they can talk until they've sucked all the oxygen out of the room. But ask about what faith institutions contribute to the economic well-being of a city. There was I was there, I looked around, it was blank stares. And this is in spite of all the evidence from major academic studies, University of Chicago, Ram Kannan, and other studies, surprising us all that churches happen to be economic engines in churches, in cities, even the smallest churches, often driving economic well-being in neighborhoods. So after that meeting, I gathered a team of leaders ranging from business people to community benefit organizations to pastors, and we together in a research project scoured the nation for models of churches that were doing job creation or job placement or job readiness systems, either placing or training or creating jobs. And what we found was amazing. Hundreds of modest, what we call small is beautiful approaches to economic transformation. We wrote these up in a book called The Work of Our Hands. It's out in the lobby if you're interested. And we gave it to every pastor in the city. We gave it to every faith-based nonprofit leader and about 400 business people. We gave it to the mayor and to the city council. And then we launched a series of annual conferences on social enterprise featuring many of those examples that we had come to know. But books can gather dust and conferences come and go. We knew that we needed a process, actually, that would stimulate an ecosystem. Only then would this be sustainable. So we launched an annual pitch fest. We called it the Spark Tank because we don't like sharks. We call this the Shark Tank without the teeth. And we were aiming at helping churches, faith-centered entrepreneurs, community benefit organizations think about and stimulating this idea of a Christ-centered business that would accomplish a social good. The first year we raised, I think it was only $7,500, and we made 3 awards that included an inner-city fitness club where kids paid dues and a street-level ad agency that distributed flyers for campaigns, et cetera. That was another church. The second year, I think we raised $15,000 and we awarded 7. The third year, we raised $26,000. We awarded 10. We began to feel some momentum building. And now, after 5 years, we've helped to launch about 38 small social enterprises with startup investments. More than 20 are generating revenue actively right now, and that's a 60% success rate. The national average for success rate of startups is 25%. So we feel those are doing pretty well. It's twice the national average. Well, why? Turns out that churches, you've heard that phrase secret sauce this last couple of days. Churches have that secret sauce that can help a small business succeed, from providing an instant customer base to experienced mentoring and accountability, or small investors to help generate equipment purchase. And just last year, those 20 businesses generated $1.2 million in revenue, and even more importantly, hired 122 people who were hard to hire, people who have barriers to employment. That's 122 people who have an economic solution in their lives, some who had formerly been incarcerated, but because now they have a job, they avoided recidivism, saving the state about $75,000 a year in the costs of incarceration. That's 122 families experiencing new levels of freedom, 122 churches seeing their contributions increase even by just a little. It's a small but beautiful effort to move the needle, and every city has the faith foundation to do this. The social enterprise models that we've helped to catalyze are diverse. Rockpile Landscaping hires men coming out of prison. Tree of Life Cafe and Bakery is a restaurant that hires people coming out of rehab. Cornerstone is a coffee shop that works with formerly homeless women. Lightwear, a clothing company that employs women in rehab. Citadel, a temp agency that trains and places hard-to-hire folks. And there are many more. The numbers are small. This is modest. This is not grand scale. This is modest. But the impact is measurable and far-reaching. And I'll tell you personally, the stories coming out of these experiences, these enterprises, have renewed my faith in the power of the gospel to solve complex community problems, where social issues and economics are intertwined. Let me tell you about Sal. Sal was a powerful 6'5" gang member whose street name was Knockout. After his gang life landed him in prison and lost him his family, he got out of prison, went through a year-long rehab program at the rescue mission. So important what rescue missions do, James, where he came to Christ. And needless to say, given his record, nobody would hire him. Big guy, all tatted up. His mentor was meeting him with him one day and said, Sal, now that your life has clearly changed, what would you like to do with it? And Sal shook his head. He said, I hardly even dare to answer that question. I don't know, but a long time ago, I had a little tiny short experience as a baker, and I liked it. Maybe I'd like to do that. 1 week later, Tree of Life Cafe and Bakery calls him and asks them to be their baker. And now for the last 2 years, Sal has been baking the best blueberry scones in the city. He got his daughter back, and at 40, he's in the same high school English class with her. Last week telling me, I'm learning about the correct use of the semicolon. Can you imagine the change in his life and in the life of our city? Stories repeated for Sandra, who used to be in charge of the guns in her gang, but now she serves customers with the light of Christ streaming out of her eyes, remembering each of their names. Story similar for little red-haired boy named Jeremy. The gospel came to life for him at North Fresno Church. And they were providing male leadership for him and friendship, things to do in the summer. He soaked it all up like a sponge because, his dad was in prison and hadn't seen him in a long time. One day, he shows up with an older man at church, introduces him to the pastor, Pastor Lauren, and he said, Pastor, this is my dad. And the pastor introduced himself. The dad's name was Jeremy also. And senior Jeremy said, I just got out of prison, Pastor. Can you help me find a job? And the pastor said, well, why don't you come work for us? Because last year we started Rockpile Yard Service. And so Jeremy went to work for Rockpile Yard Service. 2 weeks later, it came time to pay him. And they learned that he wasn't banked, of course. And so they went down with him and got a bank account. He put his first paycheck in the bank. A couple of days later, an even older man comes to church. And he's looking for Pastor Lauren. He walks up to Pastor Lauren and he says, what's going on here? And Pastor Lauren backs up a little and says, excuse me, what do you mean? He said, well, my son just got out of prison. And every time that's happened before, he's reoffended it within 3 days. But this time he's got a job and he's got a bank account and he's got money. Like, what's going on here? And soon after that, North Fresno Church had 3 generations worshiping because the church was able to provide a job. What's going on here? That's a great question for all of us. Rockpile has now given work experience to nearly 24 men, half of which have gone on to full-time employment in better jobs. We've talked about this the last day or so. So much has been written about the potential toxicity of many charitable approaches, from Bob Lufton's book, Toxic Charity, to Fickert and Corbett's book, When Helping Hurts. We've begun to understand that even very well-intentioned charity has the potential to steal dignity and wound the soul, to remove incentive for change, to actually perpetuate cycles of poverty by rewarding inaction on the part of the recipient, or, perhaps more importantly, by ignoring systemic injustices that may be contributing to the cycle, or even worse yet, in a wicked irony, by creating institutions whose existence actually depend on the problem to continue in order to justify their work. But cities that develop a social enterprise ecosystem, on the other hand, like any business, can iterate or shift depending on the demand, choosing new forms to accomplish new ministry goals, and they can do it without asking for more money from the church. Now, none of this for us has been easy. There are a lot of holes. For as much as we're impressed with the numbers that are coming in from our metrics project, there have been a whole lot of challenges, as you might expect. We got behind some models that sounded really good at the front end, but in the end were not sustainable. I mean, there was the juice bar in the heart of the hood where it turns out people like hot Cheetos, not kale and spinach smoothies. The custom skateboard painting business that worked out well when the artist staffer was there, but folded and moved when he moved on and his institution could not replace his particular blend of artistic talent and street experience. The boxing gym that couldn't charge enough to keep the lights on. There were nonprofits that regarded these investments we were making as just another grant and operated their enterprises like just another program rather than a business to be built. I mean, I could fill the next hour with all the challenges. But those challenges should not have surprised us. In fact, they were essential. They're part of an approach that says, fail early, fail forward. Fail early because it's less expensive. Fail forward because you learn through failure. You iterate to a more successful approach. It's part of a theology that says, cast your bread upon the water, and it will return to you. It will come back to you. The parable of the talents reminds us that money is just a tool, and sometimes it must be invested for the sake of the kingdom with no guarantee of return. Responsible risk is rewarded. Fear and timidity is not. Business people call it faith. How do business people spell faith? It's R-I-S-K. Cities can cultivate this kind of faith and build the ecosystem if we build this partnership between business and faith institutions. To help us overcome some of the challenges, we've added layers of preparation and support. This year, we launched the first ever Social Enterprise Academy in the Valley. 8 teams went through the first cohort and are in process of launching. There's a restaurant specializing in grilled elote that will employ pregnant teens. There's a music school delivering music lessons to children in districts without music programs for a fee, a sliding scale, and several more. We've added a social business plan workshop, doing several of them now. We've started gathering social enterprises in networking parties so that they can meet and support each other to build the ecosystem in our city. We're courting private investors willing to make low or no interest startup loans. And next year, God willing, we'll add a micro-enterprise pipeline along the lines of what Oye is doing and so many others, Launch Chattanooga and many others. JP Morgan Chase, through their Pro Neighborhoods grant, just named Fresno as one of 3 winners in the country last week, and the press conference is next week announcing it, for $5 million to invest in exactly this kind of enterprise development, and we are part of that Pro Neighborhoods grant. So here's some of what we're learning from the ecosystem, about creating an ecosystem for a social enterprise ecosystem to flourish in a city. The first is that we have to work hard at creating legitimacy for the category of social enterprise among faith leaders. We've learned that they need to see that it's legitimate, doable, alternative form of accomplishing their ministry goals, an approach that's even more sustainable and even more effective than the approaches they're working with. They have to see that as a possibility. And that's no small thing. Although we're finding that the idea of social enterprise is a fresh wind for many faith leaders, at least it gets a hearing. But you have to be prepared biblically, and that's crucial, featuring models in Scripture where commerce is utilized for kingdom goals. Wish we had more time to explore that. I'll mention it later, perhaps, in our conversation. Number 2, we need multi-sector involvement from the business community, the finance community, the pastoral and ministry community, and local colleges and universities. Each of those brings a very specialized knowledge and skill set, as well as a network and different kinds of credibility and expertise. Thirdly, we've learned that outside examples of social enterprise need to be featured, ones that are working, and it's crucial to utilize those to inspire people. In Fresno, we have a hard time imagining what's possible because for so long we had this pathological self-loathing. We didn't know it was possible that good things are happening elsewhere that are replicable. Make sure that some are modest and others are more robust when you feature examples. Fourthly, an anchor institution services to wrap around and nurture the process, a backbone organization to lean into the process and to wrap other services around. We've become trained in work life, soft skills training. We've become trained in faith and finances, financial literacy training, because all of those are key to the success of a social enterprise ecosystem. So you need an organization providing that kind of wraparound service. And then finally, you need a local win. Sometimes it's just easier to take a pastor or a leader with you and point to something. Sit them down at Tree of Life Cafe and Bakery, have lunch together and say, by the way, did you know this amazing food you just ate was served by one of the most dangerous men in the city? That woman that just greeted you with the light of Christ streaming out of her eyes, she used to be someone you would not want to meet on a back alley, and if you did, she'd have 3 kinds of gun with her. Sometimes it's just easier to point to something than to try to convince folks. My challenge today to those of us in the church and those of us in school and in business is to at least ask the question, could social enterprise be an alternate way to accomplish a particular ministry objective or meet a particular community need instead of fabricating yet another program or yet another nonprofit? And this may seem like a new world to move into, way beyond our pay grade, a layer of complexity that we don't need right now. Believe me, I understand. But I would submit to you that some of our caution with regard to strategies like this come more from a lack of familiarity, not a lack of doability. The fact is, we're going to spend money anyway on our programs. We're going to have to raise revenue anyway for our nonprofit, and maybe we feel more comfortable with programs and organization because that reflects our training and experience. But what if we could depend on the skill and the knowledge sets that our parishioners employ every day in their work, from finance to accounting to procurement to staff development to marketing and sales? What if they were in charge, not us? What if our job was just to bring resources together, to provide covering, to be the cheerleader, to keep the enterprise focused on Jesus? We can do this. It's being done all over the country by leaders who have discovered an approach that solves a community problem and that pays for itself. And it's so biblical. I'll point you to 2 Kings 4. The widow and the oil, and I don't have time to share that with you today, but maybe later. I dream, brothers and sisters, and I hope you dream too, that the faithful in every city can cultivate and release their natural resources and their talents to create ecosystems of innovation that will solve community problems and bring transformation. I dream that every city, all of our cities represented here, could be startup cities for the sake of the Sals and the Sandras and the Jeremys in our city. I hope you find yourself in that dream at some point. Thank you.